Honorable, okay, Senator Frederick.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Speaker, honorable members. I rise to add my thoughts to this ongoing debate of the motion, which addresses the emotive issue of reparations and which seeks to address the state of the reparations effort in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I have heard the presentations that have been made so far, some in part, others from start to end. And let me start, Mr. Speaker, honorable members, by stating what is obvious. I am a black woman, a black Vincentian woman of mixed heritage. I am the great-granddaughter of Mary Rodriguez, whose ancestors come from Madeira, off the coast of Portugal. I am the great-granddaughter of Martha Stanislaus, a manumitted African slave from Grenada. I am the black daughter of Vynnette Frederick, herself of Portuguese and Indian descent, and Vynnette Frederick, himself of African descent. Mr. Speaker, just to say that, and if we all say from whence we came, it fills you with a sense, well, in my case, of pride. We, however, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, have not all learned how to love our blackness, how to love our Vincentianness. In many cases, the love of St. Vincent and the Grenadines and the love of self is used as a tool to divide us. And so, I am grateful for the opportunity to stand in this hallowed space to declare my blackness and to declare my ethnicity. I welcome every opportunity that opens the conversation that will take us along these paths. Because love of self and love of history, our history as a people, was not something that was taught in school. I graduated from secondary school in 1992, and I learned Vincentian history in the context of a wider Caribbean history. But I credit not only my own curiosity, but exercises such as these with permitting me to delve deeper into a conversation on reparations, which cannot be made without a conversation on race, self-image, self-love, and validation of what it means to be Vincentian. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, honorable members, I think it is fair to say that in order to have the buy-in, support, and energized effort on the part of the general public and all people in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, it is important to genuinely have this discussion. One cannot use the tools of division, name-calling, insults, degradation of black, indigenous Garifuna, Portuguese, white, Indian, mix-up Vincentians. You can't use the tools of division, use the tools of degradation, and then ask to be acknowledged for determinedly bringing the conversation to the fore. It will sound disingenuous to those of us who have been the recipients of those insults, because although this is a historical conversation, the legacy of the degradation is still rooted in our society today. And that is why Dr. Hilary Beckles says this is part of a large healing. Reparations is not solely an academic, legal construction. The discussion is an opportunity and offers us an opportunity to have a genuine conversation about where we are as black people in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, where we are as Garifuna in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, where we are as whatever your racial composition is. And unless you are genuinely willing to explore the hurt, you can't convincingly make the argument. Mr. Speaker, I think it is important to put on record for the benefit of other black women in St. Vincent and the Grenadines how I learned to love myself and appreciate my value as a black child. It is important, Mr. Speaker, because the hope is that as a nation, we would galvanize behind this initiative to have the conversation from the position of appreciating how important it is, because we understand that we love ourselves and see that there are many answers to be given by those who subjugated our ancestors, and by those, by extension, keep us in some form of slavery still today. My aunts on my Portuguese side, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, they were strong women. At the age of 12, I remember one of them telling me, Vynnette, before you make a man put his hand on you, live under a coconut tree and eat sand. That was her humble way of saying, do not ever allow yourselves to be abused by any man. When I was 12 years old, I was wondering, what is she talking about? But that was an important thing to hear, because it allowed me to understand that at my foundation that I had values, so I shouldn't allow myself to be treated any and anyhow. When I read this motion, I couldn't help but think about my own father and how he used to tell me about knowing 6 slaves. How is that possible? Well, he's 90 years old. And when he was 6, which is when he remembers walking to the house of Mohammed Bremner and hearing from T. Nancy and Moshe Bud what it was to be a slave. That does something to you when as a child you hear those stories and you understand what it means. You see how your own family members take it upon themselves to fight this power. This power that we are seeking to define, which has essentially undermined the development of this region. So I understand how my father could talk about what it meant to see Captain Short, who lived in the Great House, to see that there was a whipping post still there. And he would go to take message to Captain Short. And the black woman who was his helper would tell him to go and sit where the dogs were, because you're going to dirty up Captain Short's yard. I remember what it did to him to see, by his estimation today, 15 pounds of roasted beef being taken to feed the dogs of Captain Short. And he said he knew that nobody in the village was eating like that. And it is when we hear these stories and they imprint on our minds that we understand why our parents and grandparents are so resilient. We understand why, in my own case, I remember my mother sending me to school in a storm, because education was seen as so critical. You're not missing school no matter what. Why is this? Why do our parents make these decisions? It is because the legacy of slavery says to them particular things. And they either put it in their children to break the chain, or for some, they continue to be bound by it. So I'm grateful for this opportunity. I say, I understand why he was jailed in 1970 for leading a Black Power movement in Tobago, along with Geddes Granger and Clive Nunez and others. I get it. Because upon returning from university to see that nothing had changed in the lives of those under the colonial yoke, something had to be done to encourage black pride. And therefore, if this discussion on reparations is being explained to me in the context of furthering that conversation on black pride by holding our ancestors to account, then that is the conversation I want to participate in wholeheartedly. You know, people have spoken about their emotions. when discussing reparations and slavery. And if you think about it, everything that attaches to this conversation is an emotional one. You think about how women perceive themselves, how they are being asked to value themselves in the context of our society. And you see a conversation that takes us back to slavery. You think about how we have relationships with one another, how we have conjugal visiting relationships, common law relationships, and you think about a conversation that leads us back to slavery. You even think about what we see on the political rostrum to light fire on our supporters. And it takes us back, in many instances, to those deep-seated stereotypes that slavery has implanted in us that have not yet been rooted out. Mr. Speaker, so in preparing for today, my mind went all over, everywhere. Thought about my ancestors. I thought about the women I interact with who come to my office, those who need assistance from the state, those who are educated, those who are not. And I really thought I ought to try to bring my own contribution to the debate from the perspective of women. Because in looking into slavery, so that I could fully appreciate all the extent of what a reparations conversation would be, I decided to look at the role of women in slavery. And I'm saying that a reparations conversation can't happen without a reconciliation conversation. I'm saying it can't happen without looking into how we treat each gender, treats one another, and how we seek to empower and uplift those among us who have not yet learned self-love. And I see really the conversation on reparations as being one which must include looking at the legacy of slavery. Because the legacy of slavery in the Eastern Caribbean is something we continue to define, try to fix, define, understand, identify. And so when we, as a parliament, are being asked to consider such an important motion as this, we must have a conversation about what the legacy of slavery has done to St. Vincent and the Grenadines as people. In order to heal the wound, we have to delve into it. And I appreciated the presentation made by the Honorable Minister of Foreign Affairs, who went into what we have heard to some extent before, all the harmful experiences, thank you, that categorized being a slave. So the whippings, the work till you can't, you don't know what to do, till you drop dead, you're working, beating, unfair treatment, true and true and true, for year after year after year after year. You know, the pain for me is not only in the historical evidence of who owned slaves and how they were treated, you know. The pain for me is in the special treatment that was meted out to women. Women were expected to do just as much work in the field as men. They were also charged with the responsibility of child rearing. And this child wasn't your child. This child was owned by the planter who owned you. I think that we see in the domestic violence meted out to women today, the legacy of slavery. It is critical for Vincentians to understand that if we don't have an appreciation for ourselves, we can't pass on those types of values to our children. Can't do it. If you're not proud of where you've come from, how can you tell your child to be proud of who he or she is? When is it ever okay to look at an educated black woman in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and refer to her as picky head, dry head, or nappy head? When is that ever all right? When is that ever acceptable? Never. And if the salesman who wants to be acknowledged for selling a product to me has said these negatives about me, well, I don't want to tell him where he could go with his product. You know, I often wonder, Mr. Speaker, what would have happened in 1834 if the slaves had a chance to talk? What would have happened if the slaves could look at the planter and speak truth to power? Maybe one or two of them from the house might have said, "Thank you, Master. It wasn't so bad." Hoping for some nice little crumbs from the table. Maybe he would have said, "Let me acclaim you, for without your deciding to do this, it might never do." I don't know. Those from the field, Mr. Speaker, the dogs, the dirty dogs, those who are the uneducated rump, what about them? Many of them couldn't read. So maybe they would have taken a newspaper and used it to wrap saltfish, I don't know, because they weren't all literate. What was their value? For the planter, they were the lowest common denominator. What would have happened if there was an opportunity for the slave to speak? Would it have been thank you? I would like to erect a monument to you. You are a gift to the people. The best thing ever. You see, Mr. Speaker, it would not have been because it would have been repeated denigration of character, self-worth. You know, it would have been all about keeping those people down. And you think they might not be able to tell you in the best English how they feel, but I would have loved to give them a chance, Mr. Speaker, to speak their mind. I wish. We have some examples. Frederick Douglass said it in his own narrative of his life. Solomon Northup did. Ashton Warner did. So we have some idea of how dehumanizing it was. But I dare say, Mr. Speaker, honorable members, the legacy left still continues to dehumanize us. You know, the internet is an interesting tool. I went to www.ancestry.com and looked for slave registers of former British colonial dependencies between 1812 and 1834. And it's eye-opening. It is emotional to look at the formal, proper, legal way in which the undoing of our blackness was organized, was done methodically, you know, best penmanship ever. Rabaka Estate, the biennial return of slaves belonging to the Rabaka Estate, property of Alexander Cumming. Any relative of yours? Yeah. Oh, just checking. By John Carmichael. Mr. Speaker, the color, how fat, what they were employed to do, and what caused the increase. Imagine you had to justify what caused the increase of your property. So the birth record of the children born into slavery and the decrease. So who died? William, a Negro, died at 6 days. Interestingly, Dr. Beckel said that infanticide was one of the forms of rebellion that slaves chose. I recall that and wondered whether the 6-day-old was a victim, because instead of being born into the hell that was slavery, parents chose death for their children. A 43-year-old laborer named Ben died. No cause of death, you know, just death. So we don't know if they were killed, beaten to death, worked to death. Just dead. So you better believe there needs to be a conversation on reparations. I will agree with you there. Mount Grenadines, Registry of Slaves on Richmond. The evidence is there. Cane Grove, yes. So there's no argument there. But don't for 1 second tell me, Mr. Speaker, that we can have this argument and not discuss whether we are permitted to value our blackness in this country, whether it is used as a tool against us, whether it is used to incite us, to divide us, and whether those who want to be acclaimed for bringing the issue of reparations to the fore cannot equally be acclaimed for their use of the tools of division in that same regard. So let us have the conversation, Mr. Speaker. And don't ask me to get over it. Tell me to get through it, because it is a process. Reconciliation and reparation must go hand in hand. Mr. Speaker, there is an entire chapter in the book Britain's Black Debt. And I recommend this book to anybody who's interested in exploring all of the questions that are being discussed today and regionally. I recommend it to you. I recommend it to your children. Because interestingly, Dr. Beckles, Hilary Beckles, yes, who is the author, spoke about his own journey. You see, because it's emotive even for him, although it is a scholarly exercise. He's not leaving out the emotion in it. He said in the introduction that when he entered Hull University, the same university where William Wilberforce's, how did he put it? Let me find the exact same place. He said when he entered this same place where the promotion of all the efforts of Wilberforce came to the fore and were examined over and over, the irony wasn't lost on him, because his start was not as a planter, but as the descendant of the slave. And the greater discussion that needs to take place, Mr. Speaker, which I am hoping this debate will provoke, is about whether in the legacy of slavery, we see it playing out, the legacy that we are left, we see it playing out in how justice is apportioned in this country, and how justice and the officers of justice are used in this country. Is there one type of justice for the poor black man and a different type of justice for the rich black man? Is there a different type of justice for the mixed black, half whatever man? The white man, the Portuguese man, and woman? Is that where we see the painful legacy of self-hate perpetuating itself in our community? Is there an arrogance now, a sense of entitlement that exists among those in authority? A sense of entitlement to all that is St. Vincent and the Grenadines, whether it be our organizations, our justice system, our schools. You see, I am saying that to have a reparations discussion, we need to start at home. Do women face a particular challenge in St. Vincent and the Grenadines? Because there is an entire chapter in Professor Beckles, Sir Hilary Beckles' book about Chapter 6, prostituting enslaved Caribbean women. Interestingly, we talk about the licks and so, but why we didn't talk about the rape? The indiscriminate rape of Caribbean women at the hands of planters who felt that at any point of time, in day or night, they could pull a woman and she had no choice but to comply because she didn't own herself. She was the property. There is a story of the slave who killed her master and was sentenced to death in a proper running court because the rules say, you're property, so you have no rights. How has that perpetuated our consciousness in St. Vincent and the Grenadines? How has that legacy entrenched itself in St. Vincent and the Grenadines? Is this a conversation we need to have? Yes. Yes, it is. For every woman who believes that it is her lot to get raped, and Mrs. Speaker, you wouldn't believe it. I had a client one time tell me, well, he raped me, but I'm interested in the maintenance for the child. You could imagine, Mr. Speaker? He raped me, but I am interested in the maintenance. Mr. Speaker, somehow in my head, as a woman, I see that going straight back to the legacy of slavery.
You have 9 minutes to conclude.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will make use of them. Mr. Speaker, what hurts even more when I look at the role that women played in slavery, that women owned slaves. There are women who owned slaves. And some of them, the justice meted out by them was worse than on the plantations where the men owned. So even as a gender, Gender, we hurt one another. What a conversation must we have in St. Vincent and the Grenadines if we are truly and genuinely to approach this issue of reparations. It is a non-issue that there is a question to be answered. It is a non-issue that there are apologies to be made. Of course. Of course. But let me categorically state, Mr. Speaker, that I, Vynnette Frederick, the proud black daughter of African slaves and Portuguese and Indian indentured servants to this Eastern Caribbean, do not believe that I, in good conscience, can stand and have a discussion on reparations, which includes being asked to put on record as part of this government high regard and commendation to Prime Minister Dr. the Honorable Ralph E. Gonslaves in St. Vincent and the Grenadines for his commitment to and determination in initiating the reparations conversation at the highest levels of regional government authority and to pushing forward the fight against European conquest, genocide, the transatlantic slave trade and slavery, colonialism, and for reparations. Indeed, I believe that by my own conduct, by my own development, by my own survival and the survival of my ancestors, and by the legacy that has been left by my foreparents, I will continue to have the conversation regarding reparations, and by my own conduct, and by who is Vynnette Frederick, to fight against European conquest, genocide, transatlantic slave trade, slavery, colonialism, and anything that seeks to demean the exalted position of the strong black Vincentian woman in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Mr. Speaker, I am grateful to you.
Honorable